y bienvenidos a esta sesión de la eficacia de la publicidad en radio. En primer lugar, y para ser muy breve, agradecer la invitación tanto a la Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona como a la SER, a la organización del Congreso, por permitirme estar aquí con estos grandes profesionales. Y ya sin dilatarnos más, porque lo interesante es lo que nos va a contar tanto el ponente como mis contertulios en la mesa, voy a dar a presentar a nuestro ponente de hoy. Tengo el honor de presentar a Fred Jacobs, quien dará la ponencia de esta mesa. Y para que tengáis una idea, es presidente y fundador de Jacobs Media Strategies, empresa que lleva más de 4 décadas ofreciendo investigación y consultoría a marcas y a grupos mediáticos, entre ellos radios comerciales y radios públicas. En este caso opera en el ámbito de Norteamérica. Con una perspectiva muy innovadora, tanto de la radio y de los formatos radiofónicos, ha sido reconocida su labor y la labor de esta empresa con diversos galardones, entre ellos el que probablemente me llame más la atención sea la inclusión en el Salón de la Fama de la Radio en 2018, que es el primer investigador y consultor que tuvo el honor de formar parte de ese salón. Y bueno, y otra cuestión, también otro reconocimiento, sería el prestigioso Premio Nacional de Radio de la National Association of Broadcast. Y sin más, no sé si tenemos la posibilidad ya de...
I'm Fred Jacobs, and first and foremost, I really appreciate you having me. It is truly an honor to be able to present to you today. And I'm sorry for all kinds of reasons that I was not able to be there with you in person in Barcelona. So today's presentation is about a topic that is very much near and dear to all of us in radio, the creation and monetization of digital content for radio. Really, for more than 2 decades now, legacy radio broadcasters have struggled to first figure out the digital threat, and then later the digital opportunity, and put all of that into perspective. So today I'm going to try to sort it out for you and provide you with a tool that might actually help you identify opportunities easier and more strategically. Now, I do have a quick caveat here. This presentation has a clear red, white, and blue tint to it. It is indeed from the American perspective, which is where I am. I don't expect, though, that the lay of the land is all that different where you may be, but I did want to make sure that the data slides I show you are all identified as being from the US of A. But first, let's talk about me. One of my favorite topics, of course. That's me on the left. Jacobs Media turned 41 years old last month. It was a company that I started on my kitchen table in my hometown of Detroit back in 1983. I'm one of 2 brothers who runs the company. There's actually a 3rd brother, not pictured here, who works for us as well. So you can just imagine what our family dinners must be like. So I'm the programming guy, the creative who launched and popularized the classic rock format back in the mid-'80s in the US. My brother Paul, who you see there on the right, younger, better looking, and of course you can even just see the way he's dressed. He's the sales guy. So together we make a really good team. We see issues impacting radio through the dual lens of product content on the one side and sales marketing on the other. And this presentation is really a mashup from both of us. So before I jump into the meat of the presentation, let's remember this truly important axiom, whether we are producing radio formats or digital content, doesn't matter. We have to be where the people are, or fish where the fish are. We have to go after eyeballs and ears where there are lots of people engaged. We want to make things for big audiences if we can, and we want to look for financial opportunities where there's ample capital to go around. Of course, we want it to be fundamentally simple, but again, fish where the fish are is an important concept. So I'm going to show you three data slides, and this is the first one. Again, these are all from the US. We're going to talk about research a little bit later on in this presentation here. I'm a big believer if there is research that is available that somebody else has paid for and we can use it, we absolutely should. So what you're looking at here is the US advertising media market from 2023 projected out to 2027. If you look on the far left, you can see the lion's share of the advertising market is going to the internet, and there's going to be projected at least, and of course we believe this, a huge increase from where we were last year in 2023 to where we are projected to be in 2027. Moving to the right, we can see that television is expected to go up marginally. Radio really flattish there. Again, some digital involved, but actually a pretty low percentage. So from 16.2 to $16.8 billion in US radio, and then so on down the line, out of home, newspaper, etc. But when we just look at what is happening with the internet versus radio, we definitely see that the dollars have in fact moved rather heavily toward the digital side. This is a slide, a piece of research from BIA here in the States that looks at local US advertising revenue, again, projecting it out to next year. So this is pretty close to the reality that we live in. And you can see now that digital is set to outpace traditional by just a few percentage points, 52 to 48. But that is, in fact, significant. And when we look on the left-hand side, we see the digital media revenue at $89 billion, and we see traditional at $82 billion. So again, very much like that first slide I showed you, the shift, of course, is on and has been on for a long time. Let's take a look at where the audio advertising dollars are headed. And you can see there in red, that is where radio was in 2022, 2023, and then projected out to this year, next year, all the way up to 2028. And you see that radio piece slowly shrinking, right? From the low 11s to the mid to high 9s by 2028. And then when you look at the gray pieces, digital audio, you can see that the growth is going to be significant in the same period of time. And so after Paul and I started looking at all of this data, we started rethinking the radio model when it comes to growing challenges to sell and market broadcast, or linear as it is sometimes called, advertising. And the growth curve clearly points to digital, of course, as we've seen on these slides. But that doesn't mean that even though that's where the dollars are going, it's simple to actually go over to the digital side of the street and pick up all those bags of money. It's complicated. And part of the problem is that inside most radio station, that relationship between traditional and digital are sometimes in conflict with each other. And to that end, when we think about the lens that most radio stations, certainly in the States, are looking through, it is in fact the radio lens. So let's take a look at the radio model. And of course, there's radio in the center of the universe, our radio stations, and then kind of rotating around the station are all the different things now that we can do in the digital space. We can have websites, and we can produce podcasts, and we can have mobile apps, we can do social media, we can do contesting, we can do events, lots of different things that we can do. But to a great degree, the mindset in radio is very much that all roads lead back to the towers and the transmitters. Pretty much everything that we do in all of these spaces are designed to drive the content, drive the eyeballs back to radio. So we started thinking, what if we actually turned this model on its side and started to think about our operations, not just as radio stations, but as content factories? Now, of course, radio is part of that content, and you can see that going off to the left. Part of the content, of course, that we would produce is in fact radio content. And in fact, if you look carefully, you can see the font I use for radio is a bigger font than the one I use for all of the other content extensions here. So radio, of course, is still a content priority. It's an important part of an operations brand and, of course, marketing. But all these other pieces of content could be produced without a user actually even listening to the radio station. That's why I crossed out the word radio up at the top of this chart. This is really a new model for media, not a new model for radio. So again, we might produce a podcast that has nothing to do with the radio station, but it just might be an opportunity to be able to produce something where there is an opportunity in a marketplace. Same thing with a newsletter. We might want to put out a newsletter that is all about our local marketplace that is not even branded with the radio station. So this is a model that we talk about a lot in our strategy sessions. But even when we kind of get our heads wrapped around this, it still poses a very important question that we have to ask ourselves. And here it is right here. How can we prevent radio random acts of digital? And what I mean by that is producing and creating digital assets that are in fact random, not particularly strategic. For a bunch of reasons, they seemed like good ideas at the time, but kind of ended up not being particularly good ideas at all. So maybe the content that we're thinking about isn't such a great idea. Maybe there's not a great market for it, like those fish that I showed you earlier. Maybe we can actually attract sufficient eyeballs and ears to our digital content, but for whatever the reason, maybe the market is flooded with this content, or there's no market for it really, or for other reasons, our salespeople don't seem to be able to sell it. Those are all important issues. So there has to be some kind of a filtering process that we use, questions that we and our teams can ask each other that would pressure test our digital concepts. So in that way, we don't end up greenlighting something that sounds cool or was a good idea at the time, or it's something in our capabilities, but maybe isn't a great idea. And we skipped a bunch of steps or failed to really be tough on ourselves from the jump, from the beginning of when this concept was on the table. So what I'm going to leave you with today is a way to actually test your digital concepts and plans. And it comes down to 17 questions for your radio teams, but they could be other kinds of teams that you have in the building or in the company. 17 questions to ask yourselves before you actually start committing to making content. We've been thinking about this throughout this past summer, creating a lot of questions, and we have learned this is a very iterative process. There were some questions that we came to at the very beginning that we dropped, and then there have been other ones that have actually emerged that really feel better. So it'll be interesting to see how these questions resonate for you. You may have some ideas for other questions, and I would absolutely want to hear that. Because again, we're dealing with a lot of broadcasters in our community and in your community. Not every concept is going to pass a consensus test, but hopefully most of them will. So the first question is there a hole in the market for it? Does this concept exist already? Is it being done by somebody else? Is it being done well? In essence, is the hole already filled? It may be a great idea, but maybe somebody else got there first to a point where maybe it's not such a great idea for us to challenge it. So that's the first question. Is there a hole in the market? And then I think one of the most important questions, and I touched on this earlier, do we have the confidence that we can actually monetize it? I have seen so many wonderful digital concepts actually get off the ground and begin to amass an audience only to learn that the salespeople either were not interested in monetizing it, couldn't do so, were not incentivized to do so, any number of problems. So monetization, very, very important. Number three, will we be creating evergreen content? This refers to content that actually has a long shelf life. It will be as interesting maybe a few years from now as it is today. When you think about some of your favorite TV shows or sitcoms, maybe like Seinfeld and those kinds of things, they hold up really well 20, 30 years later. So that's a question to ask about the content that we're talking about producing. Is it a one and done kind of content where once it's out there, it's really not worth consuming again? Or is it the kind of thing that can be repurposed and used again? Similar but different, is the content sustainable? Will it be fairly easy and simple for us to be able to continue the concept? I'll give you a good example of this. The New York Times has a separate unit called Food that is all about recipes, and they have been amassing recipes over the last 100 years at the New York Times. So all they've had to do in order to keep their food section present and current is to add microwave instructions and maybe to include some color photos of the food itself. And because their readers and users of the food section are submitting recipes, there is actually that consumer-generated content piece, making it a very sustainable concept. So it's not a super requirement that it has to be a sustainable concept, but that can be very helpful. Is there a community, or maybe even communities plural, that will support this content? A group of like-minded people who kind of gather around this idea or concept, engage with it, contribute to it, share it amongst the group. Are there communities, social media groups that have already formed around this content that can actually help us here? It's a good question to ask. Is the content habit forming? That is it the kind of thing that you want to engage with on hopefully a daily basis, but at worst a weekly basis? For example, I play Wordle from the New York Times every day. I get a grande dark roast coffee at Starbucks every day. Those are habit forming concepts or pieces of content that work. So the question is, when we're thinking about our concept here, that habit forming aspect is really important. Morning radio shows, breakfast shows, oftentimes are very habit forming. And so that's a question to ask about this content. And then this is important as well. It can be a great concept, but the question is, do we actually have the necessary tools in our digital toolkit to be able to pull this idea off? Do we have the resources and equipment to get this done? This is important too. It's also important that there is somebody on the team who can actually own this project. Too often, what happens with digital concepts in traditional media organizations is that they become products of several different departments, and yet no one department or person actually owns this idea. It would also help along these lines that there actually is a face of the project, somebody who internally and even externally can communicate this idea to advertisers and audiences, but somebody who can own this idea, very important. Do we have the staff with the skill set to actually make this work, or is this project destined to become something that people in the organization do that is really not part of their normal jobs? And meanwhile, certainly here in the States, we have so many people wearing multiple hats, doing multiple jobs, and it just doesn't work. This is obviously a key point here, but there has to be a target audience for this content. And the question is, does our regular brand, our radio brand, appeal to some of these same kinds of people now? It's not essential, but that actually kind of reduces the friction. Is this the kind of content we can rent, or we have to rent, or can we actually own it? What does this mean? Well, we don't own everything we make. Social media is a great example. We don't own all of our likes or friends on Facebook. They can change the rules on us. A crazy billionaire can buy Twitter and change the rules, which of course has indeed happened. What can we own? We can own our own podcast. We can own our email database. We can own a newsletter. If we're going to go to the time and effort to make our own content, we need to own it. Can we create brand extensions like Coke and Diet Coke? Like a podcast having spinoffs or a newsletter multiplying to other topics? Will we be able to digitize this audience? So much of the content that we make in over-the-air radio isn't digitized. We don't have any data on these people outside of what we get from the rating company. So it's important, in fact, to be able to actually generate more data. If we're collecting email addresses from people using this content, like we would say with a newsletter, we are well on the path to digitizing the audience and learning more about them. Social media is such an important part. It is the way that people inform themselves about a variety of topics, and we can very likely use social media to get the word out to audience groups to be aware of our content, to engage with it, to share it, to talk about it, and maybe even help us grow it. And if it's good and we're actually in the moment here, social can actually help us amplify our content. AI, obviously, it's early days here with AI, but there may already be ways we can use artificial intelligence to save us some steps, research the concept, provide visual and video resources. Somebody on the team needs to think the AI piece through. This is a topic that is near and dear to me as a research guy. I've been doing research for 50 years. It has really helped guide my programming and content creation from day one. So should we do any research on the front end of our digital content ideas here? Certainly, once we get it off the ground, we can do research on it and maybe course correct it to make sure that it is on target. And better yet, maybe somebody else has already done research in the space, not dissimilar to some of the data slides that I showed you at the beginning. And then finally, do we have a marketing strategy for this content? We don't just want to produce it. We have to figure out how to get it out there, how to get it noticed, how and where to promote it. Do we have a budget for this? Are we going to use guerrilla marketing, word of mouth? How are we going to make sure that our content gets amplified and out there? So here are the 17 questions. For time purposes, I'm just going to go ahead and get all these down. I'll be happy to share my deck with you all. If you want to take a photo of this slide now, be my guest. But here are the 17 questions that we just covered here. I'm out of time for today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to present to you. Here is my contact information, our company website, our mobile app company website, my email address, my social media handles at FN Jacobs, and our blog, which is a source of conversation for lots of these different areas. I really appreciate you being here today. Hopefully next time around, I'll actually be able to be in the same room with you. Thank you very much and have a great conference.